So I did some research on air pollution. My title is PIC. As you can see, well, there's probably gray area here in the middle, but I don't really see it. I mean, that's something we're all trying to work with. Anyways, anyway, it was first introduced in the 1970s, where a few of the senators actually said yes, and although it could have affected them, they still kind of did it anyways. They wrote it because there was a couple of incidents where it was the sulfur content was a little too high, so it was producing acid rain and smog, and the acid rain was destroying some of the monuments out there, um, and it was causing deforestation. So in 1990, the Clean Air Act was signed by George H.W. Bush, or President uh, Republican President George H.W. Bush. Some of the strongest opponents using the Clean Air Act voted yes, even though it would affect the coal mine industries, their coal mine industries. Um, but the carbon emissions was not really included in there, so it was going to have some effects down the road. The sulfur content also had a lot to do with how different the lawmakers were voting. They Some of them stood to lose. Uh, and some stood to kind of gain from this legislation. Some miners, were affected because they thought it was going to lose their jobs, but it also helped California set their standards. Since it did not include the carbon emissions, um, and some of the issues came across, Jay Rockefeller and Robert Byrd, I find that kind of funny, honestly. Jay and Bird, anyways, like Blue Jay. They voted no because they thought it was going to be affecting their business more than anything. Because it did not include um, a measure for the affected miners. Bush kind of opposed that and said it was going to be too expensive, so he kind of said whatever. Alan Dixon and Paul Simon also voted. Simon also voted no. Their statutes have a higher their states have a higher sulfur content. They did see a downturn after 1990. So it was not too bad. As you can see here, the smog, and that's how pretty much we would be living today if those legislations were not passed. And as you can see, well, some of these are power plants, and they expel sulfur content and I don't know, pretty much smog. Um, well, this is on Kennedy's goodbye. I call it Kennedy's goodbye because Justice Anthony M. Kennedy, served for about 30 years. He was one of the few that actually came up with a clean power plan, and he was willing to break the conservationist right wing to limit the water and air pollution. The Massachusetts versus the EPA. This is where the EPA had the authority to regulate the greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. Uh, and they also gave us a little bit more miles to the gallon. It set groundwork for Obama era, which is pretty interesting. I find it pretty interesting because he was one of the most influential individuals who allowed the future to kind of have better um, miles to the gallon. Um, After his retirement, or during his retirement, Trump chose someone more conservative. Well, he's expected to choose somebody more conservative, which this gentleman came into play, and his name is Andrew Wheeler. So Andrew Wheeler could quickly overturn the Massachusetts versus the EPA authority on greenhouse gases. Pruitt could repeal the Clean Power Plan and replace it with less acts, um, extensive act, uh, which future presidents could face a tougher time. So moving on to the Flintstone era, I call it the Flintstone era because it's pretty much we're rolling back. Trump is to freeze anti-pollution and fuel efficiency standards. So that means we might not be able to have any of these vehicles, futuristic vehicles, which are all electric. We might still go back to a little more primitive type of transportation. Good thing we're not going into, horseback riding. Anyways, the challenge rights of states. It challenges the rights of states. It might split the market into two because some of the markets nowadays we're going into like Tesla, who has full on electric vehicles, and the other ones, well, less. Um, how can I say it? Okay, edit that. Trump is to freeze anti-pollution and fuel efficiency standards. It challenges the rights of states, split the market into two. Usually, unusual critics against environmental, actually, unusual critics against it. Some of them were environmentalists, consumers, auto industry representatives, and individual states. EPA would roll back 2012 rule, an average of 57 miles a gallon, 57 miles per hour, actually 57 miles per gallon. Unusual critics were against it: environmentalists, consumers, auto industry representatives, and individual states. EPA would roll back 2012 rule, an average of 57 miles to the gallon by 2025, because the Obama era would cut in half the greenhouse gases and emissions and reduce oil consumption. Um, so moving on to the Flintstone era, Jerry Brown, uh, our California representative, or Jerry Brown, the California governor. Oh, Jerry Brown, the California governor, uh, said California is prepared to fight for Trump to not destroy the law. A law first. Oh, Jerry Brown, the California governor, said California is prepared to fight for Trump to now destroy a law first enacted by the request of Ronald Reagan a few decades ago. It is a betrayal and an assault on the health of Americans everywhere. As you can see, we would go back to the Flintstone era, and this is the cost of the smogs out of automobiles, and of course, it can get a little bit worse. But Andrew Wheeler came up with something called Make Cars Great Again. After 2021, to reduce the cars to 37 miles an hour, or to the gallon, sorry. And lighter cars can cause, he said, lighter cars can cause death rate of 12,000 to 700, opposed to, and Obama opposed it, said he would lead by 100 less casualties. Instead of 12,000, it would be like 12,800 per se. Um, Particulate matter. Well, these are small airborne particles that are like dust, and once we inhale them, it could actually damage our lungs. It is caused directly by burning fossil fuels. Power plant industries are a major cause of this. Industrial facilities, diesel emissions, uh, they do penetrate the lungs, causing heart attacks, premature death, asthma. I have premature death twice. Impaired brain development, and in children. So children are ones of the highest affected in here. It has black carbon. Black carbon. It's caused by uh, burning fuels like fossil fuels, diesel, wood, coal. Pollution regulation focused on PM 2.5. Exposure to black carbon has serious health risks. Long exposure can lead to heart attacks and death, serious hypertension, chronic obstruction in pulmonary disease, bronchitis. I don't know if you guys like that, but it's been bugging me. Airborne in fossil fuels, which is sulfur dioxide. It is We get it by coal, by burning coal, metal extraction, ship engines. Um, when they burn to kind of like steam power, it causes eye irritation, cardiovascular system. In the cardiovascular system, when combined with water, it becomes sulfur acid. Main component of acid is of acid rain, actually, which contributes to deforestation. And then here we have the terrible 10. The terrible 10 are the ones that kind of like summed up of like the symptoms of what everybody has, which is a premature death, asthma attacks, cardiovascular disease, lung cancer. Lung cancer is pretty common nowadays, but we don't. Nobody really wants to admit that it comes from pollution. It has developmental damage on children, a lot of children. I was reading on the research I was doing, it talks about all of these affecting the children more than anything because since they're so young, their lungs kind of are not really ready for this. And as you can see here in the picture, we do have a few children with a lot of smoke, and well, it's susceptible to infections. Uh, Lung tissue swelling and irritation, low infant birth weight. Some of us don't really get to grow out of, low infant birth weight. Some children that are pretty small and tiny, and wheezing, coughing, and shortness of breath. And so this is the works cited page. Thank you. Have a good day.